And welcome, I'm Kira the Scrivener, and if you can tell by the empty gaps on my bookshelf, or more likely the title, we're doing books that defined my decade. I'm very excited. There's 15 books on this list because I wanted to be a little bit extra, and I'm going chronologically. I want to go on and on, but I'm going to try to keep myself short and be like, hey, you should reread them and do reviews, rather than just going on in this video. So hopefully hold me to that. Anyways, the first one is going to be September 2011, and this is when I read The Sniper by Liam O'Flaherty. It was my first week of high school, and I was just blown away by this book. And I thought that it was about 30 pages long. It is 3 pages long, and I've read it like 4 different times since rediscovering it. I also read it multiple times in high school because it was just the cliche one to read themes out, and I appreciate it more now on the like 10th reread than I do ever before. And it looks at this man who is a sniper who's unnamed during the Civil War in Ireland, and it really just goes into the cost of war, the cost of what it means to be in a civil war especially. And I think that has always transfixed on me. I primarily write about civil wars, and that is something that I've always just been very emotional about in regards to what does it mean to have that. Anyways, I can't go much more into it because I want to explain more, but it's only 3 pages long, and it's in the public domain, and it's practically impossible to find. I spent hours trying to buy this book with the short stories, and it's hard. So please go into the public domain, I'll link it below, and read it, and you will be wowed. And then we have January 1st, 2012, and this is when these books came into my life. January 1st, I was at a friend's house. She was sleeping in because it was New Year's the night before and she was tired. And I went to a bookshelf and I actually picked up The Lost Hero, but these books became my favorite. I don't know how to explain how Rick Riordan kind of went into my brain and changed me as a reader. At that time, I'd been a Lund dyslexic kid who had barely read anything, and these books really they were the first books I ever reread repetitively. I remembered waiting for all of the Heroes of Olympus books and staying up all night. And I think that they were the books that gave me the confidence to read. They're also pretty much the only urban fantasy books that I really, really love. And I think the character development, the character dynamics, and the relationships, and just he did a really, really good job of plotting these books. And we are bound to have some unpopular opinions on it. And this is your first one. And this is Mockingjay. I freaking love this book. I've only read The Hunger Games once, and this was in the spring of 2013, and I just went through them like crazy. I was told I wasn't allowed to read them, and then I borrowed them secretly and read them all. So I really enjoy the thematic conversations in regards to Hunger Games, and it's no more apparent in Mockingjay. Mockingjay, my goodness. I really loved the conversations around trauma and PTSD. I loved the fact that it actually explored that some decisions you can't really go back and they will always change dynamics. You know what I'm talking about. And I love sad books. I love bittersweet books. And this will always have humongous impact on how I approach stories going forward and how I found that I loved depressing books that deal with really hard stuff. Next, it was Cinder. I never thought I would like science fiction. Who would have guessed I would fall in love with it? But Cinder is light science fiction, but I love fairy tales, and I love the way that it weaved it. I love the language. This was the only other series other than Percy Jackson that, I ran out of bookstores to grab. I tried and convinced my friends, bribed them to buy copies of it because I didn't live close enough to a bookstore. It was crazy. I remember going in and spending, all my money on this new release. And this one is the most important of the Lunar Chronicles to me. Mostly because it's depressing as heck, and that's what I love. This is a villain story that a lot of people even neglect, and it makes me really, really sad because I love the nuances. There's parts of it that just thinking about it makes me bawl. I love the gray morality of Lavanna without actually making her sympathetic. She is messed up and evil and does really bad things, and yet you can feel for the choices she makes. And I think that's the highest praise you can give. And I think that Marissa Meyer just became an author that was really important to my young brain and the way that I write. So I could probably just put my high school reading list on this series because it is really impactful. There's some of my books like The Great Gatsby and Hamlet, and just all of them make me happy. To Kill a Mockingbird, obvious choice of really impactful book, but this one, The Kite Runner, is a book that changed my worldview, changed so much. it looks at Afghanistan during the time of its height and how the Soviet forces changed everything in the proxy war and the rise of the Taliban, and just an unlikable character, like makes evil decisions by not making choices, and yet redemption, and yet full circle, and very just human and beautiful, and I need to reread it. So now we have 2016 and July and the Seven Realms, otherwise known as Demon King, that begins, and this is a series I just love. It is the first series I fell in love with in college, and I read it all. I was a nanny that summer, and I made creative ways to read, like, fairly bloody YA fantasy to 2 and a 4-year-old. Like, I should have questionable thoughts on this, but I read all of this in 4 or 5 days, the whole 4 books that are each over 500 pages. Like, that is a lot, especially for a dyslexic reader who was working like 12 hours a day. Yeah, questionable practices, but this book has such great fragmented stories where you're able to really follow a thief and a retired street lord, as well as this queen who is, well, heir apprentice to a queen, and their different perspectives. And I love that there's a nuance to the characters, a nuance to how these two sides perceive it. I also appreciate the fact that so many of the elements are new and exciting, and you don't necessarily know how everything is going to happen, because it doesn't have a lot of the very stereotypical things, because I think it's a little bit earlier YA, and Cinda Williams-Shyma just writes wonderfully and beautifully, and I just adore everything about it. Probably at a different angle now, but that is because I was like, I can't find this book, I'm just gonna film anyways, and then I was filming, and I realized that this was under it the whole time. So in 2016, I read this book. This is by Irvin Dialome. It is Love's Executioner, and it is a psychotherapist book looking at existentialism. That's a hard word to say sometimes, existentialism, and this is the kind of therapy that I practice and really am a fan of. And it is really asking the big questions of life and really helping people resolve this. And this is a really intimate look at his cases, as well as his thoughts during his cases and how he dealt with things. And it is very well highlighted, and it's uncomfortable at times because it is very personal, but also really real. And as someone who is going down that path, I just found it really, really useful. Next, we have our next unpopular opinion, and this would be Go Set a Watchman by Harper Lee. I know that there's some contention around the publishing of this because of her age and whether she wanted it or whatever, but I'm talking about the contention of Atticus Finch not being a perfect little spectacle anymore. And this actually is what sold me on this book. I really appreciate the fact that we're able to see Atticus step down from his glory, because he is a human, and it is very difficult to deal with people you look up to, people you put as an idol, and watch them fall from grace, watch them make decisions that you disagree with, ideals that you thought they had placed in you that aren't there, and or are complicated in their brain. And this has to do with racism, and how even though Harper, and in this case Jean Louise, which is a weird thing to call Scout, but she deals with her father as well as other people she loves being racist and being sympathetic to people who are racist when she didn't believe that that was in them. And I can relate to that really hardly. Like, I grew up believing in tolerance and then realized that a lot of people who were influential in my life didn't share the values that I had, and I don't know how I ended up not believing those things, because I thought those were things they valued, and then realized that there's undercurrents of prejudice and bias in a lot of people you don't realize. And it hurts to watch people you fall from glory, but it's something very relatable. And I just really appreciated this book. The one issue I did with it was the killing of Jem off screen. Not happy about that, but really that's the only thing I have with it. I really am looking forward to rereading it and analyzing the heck out of this, because I didn't have a physical copy when I read it for the first time, and man, I cried a lot. So it's been about 4 years now. I think this was 2017. It was one of the very first books actually that I read on my channel, and it was also one of the very first audiobooks I ever read. So I can also praise it as a really big step of my journey of reading and on this channel. So come to December 2017, and this is when I read Saga by Brandon K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and this is a beautiful, beautiful series with beautiful art that takes place in space and is kind of Romeo and Juliet, narrated by the daughter, but like much more dirty and gritty and all of that. And it it is beautiful. It has so many themes and things that I love, but also it introduced me to graphic novels. Like, I'd been obsessed with superheroes for a long time, and yet I only ever researched them or watched adaptations because I just didn't think comic books was me. And then my friend was like, hey, I think you'd like this, and gave me the first 3 volumes, and I burned through them because they're so freaking great. And now I've read tons of comics, I've read graphic novels, and again, I'm not an expert yet, but I'm on my way. So this was a huge part in me going forward, and I'm going to stumble over my words today, and it's going to be okay because we're going to accept that. So it is April 2018, and there's a short audiobook, and everyone's talked about it, so let's listen to it. And this is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. And I have always loved writing poetry. I've never really enjoyed reading it because I'm not a huge fan of classic poetry. I'm getting a little bit more into it now that I've got into poetry as general, and I actually have a very badly lit, but I think really beautiful review of it, kind of going over my complex thoughts about this kind of poetry. But I do have to credit, even though it's not the highest rated book, by far it's the least rated book on this list, that it did open me up to this and even improve my own writing of poetry by consuming a lot more poetry because of this book, that I didn't have to be kind of more scared of it. Not that I was scared, but I was just like, they're just talking about like trees. Like, I'm not a nature person, so like a lot of the poetry I'd been forced to read or like just thought I would like ended up being about trees, and I like human emotion. So even though a lot of this style isn't necessarily everything that I love, the idea that we can talk about really important things, and this has some important things about feminism and just the demonization that women are given in society against each other, and I appreciate those a lot. I look forward to reading it now, like 2 years later, that I have a much more, I think, mature look at what poetry is and how I would perceive this, but it was definitely influential at the So May 2018, these are getting closer together, but this is Scythe. I've talked outlandishly a lot about this series. It is a series of books that is science fiction. It really confirmed my utter love of science fiction, the big questions of discussing death and life and morality and everything like that. It is groundbreaking and amazing, and I just recommend that you read it. And that's all I'm going to say about it because it's been said a million times. But I do have a lot to say about The Bell Jar. I do have a review up for this as well, and I just talk about how emotional this is. This is a classic mental health book that I read in August of 2018. I read it in one sitting, and it is also very highly analyzed and written about on here, and I can't wait to reread it again. I've like thought about like my tattoo I want to be on about this book. So it really encapsulates my feeling that even though you can have good days or bad days with mental health, that it can feel like this cage that is around you, that it can drop at any moment, and I appreciate that. I just appreciate the way that she talks about mental health in this book is very similar to how I feel about my own mental health in regards to it being a cage, in regards to just everything about it. And I love that. I am also devastated by the fact that she committed suicide only months after publishing this book, and that has a profound effect on me as well. And I can't wait to read more of her works and experience more of what kind of person she was. I've listened to and watched, no, I haven't done either of that. I have read some of her poetry as well, and that has also been really profound as well. Okay, we are in March of 2019, and this is Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. This is a really influential book because middle grade had not been something that I had read a lot of in the recent time, and yet this book stole my heart. I'd heard so much goodness about it, and I'm so glad I picked it up because the world building, the characters, everything about it is lovely. Like, it just makes me smile the way that a lot of people refer to it as Harry Potter, and I was actually going back and reading Harry Potter for the first time while going through the series that is out, the first 2 books, and I was amazed by the similar feelings that it has, that it is a very well threshed out world in which we're able to just experience magic on every corner. And it's just lovely, and you should check it out. Then for September 2019, we have You're Not a Country, Africa. I've also talked about this extensively in vlogs, in wrap-ups, in mid-wrap-ups, lots of things, but this book is really influential because it goes through and has essays as well as personal reflections and academic things about Africa and how people perceive it wrongly. It is really impactful. It is also really sassy, and it's really informative, and I think that people should pick it up. It is by a Nigerian Canadian who sadly passed away during a conference in last year, which devastated me. But I think that the messages are still true, they're still impactful, and it is a book that more people should read. And then lastly, but not leastly, on this list, we have also from September 2019, we have Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This book really just made me want to read historical fiction. I don't know the number. I was going to look it up and then I forgot the number of historical books that I've read in the last few years, because I think it is under like 10 books. And yet I have probably read like 20 historical books in the last like 5-6 months since this book that I read. So it really just united my love, especially literary fiction, and looking at the themes and developments in characters and conversations around racism, especially, and the quiet racism against the Asian community and how people perceive it. It is just a really incredible book, and I have recently read Everything I Never Told You as well, and both books are impactful and amazing, and I just can't wait for Celeste Ng to read and write more, and I enjoy that she takes time, although I'm just really impatient for more books. Anyways, these are 15 books that just highly impacted who I am as a reader, who I am as a person, and all of the above in the last 10 years of my life. So let me know some books that were really impactful for you. Were some of these impactful for you? Do we share similar experiences? And you can look me up on Instagram, on Twitter. They will both be linked below. I talk about books much more frequently than here because it's easier. And I will see you very soon. Happy reading and writing, and goodbye.